So, Supergirl finally came out, and for the past few weeks, it feels like you cannot bring this movie up without starting an argument. Because if you only scroll through YouTube thumbnails or social media, you would think this movie is either a masterpiece or a complete disaster. There doesn't seem to be much room in the middle. But after watching the movie and looking at what fans, critics, and comic readers are actually saying, I think the conversation has become way more interesting than simply asking whether it's good or bad. Because Supergirl isn't failing for the reasons most people think, and depending on what you expected going into the movie, you might walk away with a completely different opinion than the person sitting next to you. So, in this video, I will talk about if the movie is really as bad as people say it is. But before we get into that, make sure to subscribe, it means a lot and helps out the channel grow, and let's get right into it. Now, one of the biggest reasons people are so divided has nothing to do with the movie itself. The reason is timing. When James Gunn announced the new DC universe, fans were cautiously optimistic. DC had spent years struggling to build a connected universe, constantly rebooting characters, changing plans, and trying to catch up to Marvel. And then Superman came out. Whether you loved it or just liked it, one thing became clear. People finally believed DC was heading in the right direction again. And that's exactly what made Supergirl such a difficult movie to follow. Instead of simply introducing Kara Zor-El, the movie suddenly had another job. It had to prove that Superman wasn't just a lucky start. Every scene, every trailer, every casting choice was analyzed through that lens. People weren't asking if this is a good Supergirl movie, they were asking if James Gunn can keep this universe alive. Those are two very different questions. It's almost impossible for any movie to live up to expectations like that. And then came the casting debate. Long before anyone saw the movie, another debate had already started, surrounding the main actress, Millie Alcock. If you watched House of the Dragon, you probably already knew she was an incredibly talented actress. Her performance turned her into one of Hollywood's fastest rising stars almost overnight. So when she was cast as Supergirl, fans were excited. But not everyone was convinced. Some people immediately focused on her appearance, saying that she doesn't look like Kara, and some people straight up said she looked ugly. And this reaction isn't nothing new. We've seen this happen with almost every superhero casting over the last 20 years. I mean, people laughed when Robert Pattinson became Batman, and that says enough. The funny thing is, after the movie released, even many people who didn't love the film admitted one thing, which is that the actress, Millie Alcock, wasn't the problem. Also, there are some people who straight up refuse to watch the movie just because they consider her ugly or something. Grow up. One of the smartest decisions this movie makes is refusing to turn Kara into a female version of Superman. On the surface, they seem almost identical. They have the same powers, same symbol, same planet, but emotionally, they're completely different people. Clark Kent barely remembers Krypton. He grew up on Earth. Kara doesn't have that luxury though. She remembers Krypton, she remembers losing her family and watching her entire civilization disappear, which does take a toll on a person. Instead of giving us another endlessly optimistic hero, the movie leans into Kara's trauma. She's more impulsive, emotional, reckless, and angry, and sometimes she makes the wrong decision, which funnily enough makes her feel even more human. It's also much closer to the version of Kara that many comic readers have wanted to see on screen for years, because instead of asking what if Superman was a woman, the movie asks something much more interesting. What if someone survived the end of their world and never truly recovered from it? And that's where this character becomes fascinating. So why are people still so divided? Because a great main character doesn't automatically make a great movie. This is where the conversation starts to split. If you ask someone who loved Supergirl, they'll probably talk about Kara herself, and the quieter moments where the movie slows down and lets her simply exist as a person instead of a superhero. But ask someone who didn't enjoy the movie and they'll probably mention something completely different, which is the pacing, the story, the villain, and the structure. In other words, most people aren't arguing about the same thing. They're judging different parts of the movie, and that's why the discussions online became so confusing, because one person says this movie is amazing and another replies it was terrible. But if you actually ask why, you realize they're talking about completely different aspects of the film. One is praising the lead performance, and the other is criticizing the screenplay. And somehow, those two opinions get treated like they're contradicting each other. And most people aren't calling Supergirl bad because of Supergirl. They're calling it bad because they don't think the movie around her fully comes together. And I can see where they're coming from because Supergirl has an identity problem. Not in the sense that Supergirl doesn't know who she is. Ironically, Supergirl is probably the most consistent part of the movie. It's everything else that feels like it can't decide what kind of film it wants to be. One minute it feels like a gritty revenge story, the next it's a colorful space adventure, then suddenly it's throwing jokes at you that feel straight out of Guardians of the Galaxy. And a few scenes later it feels like you're watching Mad Max. And then it shifts into a quieter, emotional road trip movie. None of these ideas are bad. In fact, they're all interesting. The problem is that they don't always blend together. Instead of feeling like one carefully crafted story, it sometimes feels like you're watching pieces of several different movies stitched into one. So it's not that the movie is awful, it's just uneven. And James Gunn has never hidden the fact that he loves mixing genres. It's one of the reasons Guardians of the Galaxy became so successful. Those movies could go from emotional heartbreak to ridiculous comedy in a matter of minutes without completely losing the audience. But that's a difficult balance to pull off. Supergirl tries something similar, but it's almost like the movie is constantly changing gears before you have time to settle into one. And social media regarding this movie didn't really help either. If there's one thing superhero fans have really gotten good at, it's deciding whether they like a movie before they even seen it. We've reached a point where trailers, casting announcements, and leaked photos generate almost as much as discussion as the finished movie itself. And Supergirl was no exception. And this is not just an issue for this movie, it's an internet problem. Think about the last superhero movie you remember. Chances are you either heard it was a masterpiece or one of the worst movies ever made. There's barely any middle ground anymore. But most movies actually live in that middle ground. They're enjoyable, they have flaws, great moments, and weak ones. And that's exactly where Supergirl lands. It's not a movie that's going to redefine superhero films, but it's also nowhere near the disaster some people make it out to be. Don't even get me started on Zack Snyder fans. I may make a whole video regarding those people. So, is the movie actually bad? Personally, I don't think so. I think it's a movie that is struggling with pacing and tries to juggle too many different tones, and occasionally loses sight of its own story. But it also has beautiful visuals and some genuinely emotional moments. But does that make it a great movie? No. Does it make it a bad one? I don't think that's fair either. If I had to describe Supergirl in one sentence, it would be this. It's a good movie that's constantly reminding you it could have been a great one. And maybe that's why people are so divided. Not because everyone watched different movies, but because everyone walked away remembering different parts of the same one. I'm Nimbus, and thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.